Hi, everybody. I'm Laurie Ruettimann, and welcome to the Rise of HXM, Human Experience Management. I'm here today to talk about what it's like to power a successful business through people. And I have amazing co-hosts today. My first co-host is Minda Harts. Minda, how you doing?
Hey, Laurie, I'm happy. How are you?
Oh, gosh, I'm glad you're happy. I'm grateful that you're here. You're having a big week, and we'll talk all about it in a moment. My second co-host is Lars Schmidt. Hey, Lars, how's it going?
Laurie, it's going great. Good to be back with you and Minda, and excited to have Sharlyn join us.
Yeah, Sharlyn Lauby is our guest this week. Hey, Sharlyn, how's it going?
Good, good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, believe me, I'm pleased. You know, I'm the world's biggest Sharlyn Lauby fan, and this is really sincere. I have loved you for over a decade, so it's nice to see you and here today to really talk about what it means to be obsessed with putting people at the center of the employee experience and the business experience. So let's get started talking about that today, really focusing on practicing what we preach, which is a hard thing to do. So Sharlyn, because you're our guest today, you get the first question. Are you ready?
All right.
All right. I'd like to talk about how companies are thinking more creatively when it comes to human experience management. So what are you seeing out there? What do you like?
And you know, I'm not sure whether or not companies are truly doing creative things as much as they've come to this realization that it's time to transition to the next evolution of work. You know, we know that having a human experience is important. We know that employees are the key to our success. Businesses know this. They talk about it all the time. Talent is a key differentiator. But now we're being forced to put it into practice. Yeah. And some of that happened, you know, prior to, you know, let's just say February, March of this year. Prior to that, we were really thinking about it a lot because unemployment was low. There was increased competition for talent. Those things have not changed, regardless of the unemployment rate, regardless of what's going on with the economy. People are still competing for the best talent. And organizations are having to put the pieces in place to make sure that they attract the talent that they need in order to meet their goals, whether those are culture goals, financial goals. The organizations have all different kinds of goals. But what are the goals that the organization is trying to accomplish?
Well, I love that answer because in there is a bit of optimism, but also realism. And I think that's really a hallmark of this panel. So Lars, I wonder if, as you're out there in the marketplace, are there things that you're seeing that you like? Like, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that companies are being a bit more cognizant of the times that we're in, the 2020-ness of everything right now. And I think that there are some of them are making some meaningful, some cosmetic, but some, I think, important steps. Today I was reading an article that over 600 companies have given their employees in the US election day off so they can vote and they can encourage, voting. And I think this is such a monumental vote for this country, as CEOs are stepping up and as companies are stepping up and saying, hey, take the day. We want to make sure you have it to vote. That's significant. That hasn't happened at this scale in the past in our history. And that's definitely an adaptation to the times we're in. Companies also, I think for most of us who are parents and we're employees, we're doing both things simultaneously right now as we're working from home. And again, this is a global audience. Some of you around the world have kids that are in school. Many of you don't, and they're actually working from home. And so companies are starting to try to think about how they can adapt and better support their employees who are parents. Whether it's, flexible hours, structured, groups and ERGs to bring parents together to talk about what's working and what's not. So yeah, I think there's definitely some examples of companies that are kind of stepping up to meet some of the moments that we're facing right now.
Well, really good examples of organizations practicing what they preach, especially around HXM. And Minda, I wonder if you can, elaborate on what some companies are doing specifically to focus on the human factors that power businesses. How are companies putting this into practice? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think from my vantage point, I'm seeing a lot of conversation around racial equality and why that's important right now in the workplace. And so what some of us are going through a syndemic, right? Multiple pandemics at once. And so Lars alluded to what some of those already are. And I think that I'm seeing more companies lean into their empathy, understanding that not everybody is experiencing the workplace the same right now. And so we really had to ask people, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? We're having hard conversations that we haven't had before. And so when we talk about HXM, it's that continuous feedback that I'm seeing. You know, I'm hosting certain sessions with companies where they brought me in, 3 to 5 times to have similar conversations with various groups of employees, because, what Black employees might be experiencing right now is different than what their counterparts might be. And so what I'm seeing is more dialogue around the full experience, right? As they say, bring your full self to work. We have no choice right now. So we have to have these conversations in terms of what that looks like. So I'm seeing more dialogue between managers and their talent.
I'm real curious about that, and I'm going to stick with you for a second, because what's the difference between paying lip service and practicing what you preach? Because we have been on this weird cycle for many years where we thought we were practicing what we were preaching, right? We had well-intentioned individuals who were concerned about diversity and inclusion, equity, belonging, all the buzzwords, right? And then here we are with one pandemic or one incident, and everybody's totally surprised that work is messed up and the world is messed up. I wonder what's different this time and what could be different. How could we truly practice what we preach? Is it empathy? Because I feel like we've been empathetic in the past. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Minda?
Well, I think it's yes and. So there's been some people who have been empathetic, but they've only been empathetic to things they've experienced, right? That hits home for them. So I think that, for example, as a woman of color in the workplace, I know that the workplace is not created equal. So it's almost like being in a car ride. We both can be working at the same company and experiencing that car ride company very differently, right? So those people who are only in the front seat all the time, and those who are sitting in the back seat, or I'm one of 3 kids, always on the hump, right? So for some, not much has changed because they've always been the drivers. But now we have to understand that, again, everyone's not experiencing it the same way. And so I think that we're able to humanize each other's experiences more now, because we all are experiencing, like, kids here, partners here, pets here, so before we couldn't really empathize maybe with someone else's experiences. But I think we're all like feeling similar things now working from home. So I think that's what's different about it, right? We're all feeling some of the same things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sharlyn, I wonder if you have a take on empathy, because it's really emerging as what could be the buzzword of 2020, and yet I want it to mean more. So what do you see it meaning out in the field, out in the trenches of HR?
One of the things that I'm hearing from managers and CEOs, now that they've had to work from home for 6 months, they had no idea. I work from home. Yeah. So when all of this happened and someone said, Sharlyn, stay home, I already work from home. And for other people, if you didn't have the setup, didn't have the equipment, didn't have the support structure in place, it was a really eye-opening experience to all of a sudden be spending 24 hours a day in your house. Yeah. And it's really different. And I hear CEOs saying, I don't know how people do this. I've learned things about myself that I did not know, I did not know the stressors that I have right now. And, it kind of ties back into Minda's comments about the workforce. How many people are out there right now realizing that they are experiencing things that they've never experienced before? And hopefully they're going to take that back to the workplace when it comes time for us to be in the same structures and spend time together. I think it really ties into our role as human resources professionals when you start to think about how are we going to design a hybrid workforce. There are going to be individuals who are going to leave this experience and continue continue working remotely because they enjoy it, because they excel, because their productivity is high when they do it. And then there are going to be other people who are like, I need to leave my home every day. I need to, because that's what makes me productive. I was listening to the first conversation that you guys had with Ron Thomas, and you were talking about the employee experience. And one of the things that occurred to me is we don't spend enough time as, human resources professionals helping our employees understand the conditions that they need to create for themselves in order for them to become productive. So right now, during this period in time where we might be working remotely, or maybe we're spending a little bit of our time in a on-site environment because that's what our job requires, what are the conditions that we need in order to be productive? And that ties into empathy. Are we giving people the tools that they need? Do we understand it's not just a wish list, it's what they need in order to be successful? So I apologize. I got off my soapbox about, giving people tools. But it needs to happen.
Who's mad about that? We love your soapbox. And I know Lars is especially passionate about this. I mean, this ties in with your idea of there's not just one playbook. There are multiple ways to, take a look at HXM and the employee experience. And we should open source this and start to share these big ideas. So Lars, I wonder if you can take us there. And are we as human resources leaders sharing enough of these ideas and enough approaches here?
When it comes to open source, I'm greedy. So I'll say no, like we can always share more. There can always be more ideas, more templates, more examples that others can call upon to help kind of inform their own perspective. I think when you're tying this back to, empathy in the workplace, one of the things that I think is a big lesson for the field of HR is, historically, we've operated for the most part for playbooks, right? One size fits many. And as employees, you have to fit within these constructs we've designed, right? Whether it's, you're in the office for these days, this is how work gets done, this is how the promotion process works, this is how long you need to be in your role before you can be considered for something else. All of these rules and regulations, which, historically HR has been really good at constructing. Things are upside down now. I think from leading with empathy standpoint, like we now understand all of our employees are going through this in their own pace and in their own way based on their own individual circumstances. And so I think it's going to end up creating, as we look at kind of tying this into HXM, constructs in HR that are much more framework based and adaptive. It's not just a rigid, this is the box you fit in or you don't. It's okay. We understand some of you need this, some of you need this, some of you want to come to an office, some of you want to work from home, some of you want to work in core business hours, some of you want to work when you can based on your situation. And we have to adapt to those employee circumstances as opposed to them adapting to ours. So that to me is really interesting. I think it's a mindset shift for a lot of practitioners.
Well, I see Sharlyn nodding her head. Sharlyn, do you have something to say about that?
The only thing that I would add, that I want to add to that is it also means that we need to show empathy when employees are having a bad day. When employees have something going on in their lives, or when they get delivered some bad news and they need a moment to process it. We need to demonstrate empathy from the standpoint of we all just can't get up and forget about all of these things that are going on in our lives and just pretend like none of that is happening. So within the construct of this is how we're going to work, we also need to give people those tools that they need in order to be resilient. And I think that the past few months have taught us that resiliency is something we're not spending enough time focused on.
Well, that's interesting. And I want to talk about that because I think for me, empathy and humility are two sides of the same coin. And you can't be empathetic without first admitting that you don't know what you don't know. And so, Minda, I want to talk to you about that because we have to go out to our employee population, our total workforce in a completely different way and be humble enough to ask, what do you need, and not presume. And also understand that some people aren't going to be comfortable answering that question for a lot of different reasons. So some say that technology can help us bridge that gap and go to our employees a little bit differently. I don't know, what are your thoughts about that, about listening better, about asking better questions, and starting almost at zero in terms of a design approach to this and not really assuming anything? I don't know, I'm talking too much. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go rogue here for a second, Laurie, and say that I think that, yes, I think all of these things are important that we're talking about, but one thing I think that is missing is building trust with employees, because we're talking about HR being able to provide employees with the tools they need, but a lot of people don't trust HR, right? They get, so I think we also have to, in order to have empathy, you have to build relationships with people. And you have to your point, you said, some people, you might ask them what they need, but if they don't feel like they're in a psychologically safe environment to tell people what they need, they're never going to do that. And so it really starts with that trust. That's why I do think technology is important, because a person whom I use the car analogy, if they've always been sitting in the back seat the whole time, when someone finally asks them, what does good look like, they may not feel comfortable, or they may not have the words to articulate what good look like. And so I feel like automation is really important to be able to build those relationships, or at least even if you don't have a relationship with your HR department or your manager, that you still can provide feedback that's based off of how to make your experience better. So I think part of this is, yes, we can provide people with the tools, but they have to trust, right? That there has to be that loyalty there. So I think part of the experience has to be getting to know each other and humanizing each other's experience, so that you then can, once you've gotten to know them, that's when empathy comes, right? Sometimes it's hard to empathize with people you don't know.
Yeah, that's really well said. Please.
I was going to say, that gets back to those initial conversations that you have with people. I think about the times that, if you interview a candidate and you don't tell them the good, bad, and ugly of working for the company, and then they come into the organization and there's something completely different going on, there's that disconnect. You don't have that trust, because now if you want to go to someone and say, this experience isn't what I thought it was going to be, who do you take that conversation to? It gets back to, Laurie, you were talking about saying humility. I don't know if we tell managers that the reason they're being promoted is because they know everything, they will be reluctant to say, I don't know, because they think that their paycheck and their identity is tied up on the fact that they have to have the answers all the time.
Super good point. And Lars, when I think of HR and technology, I think of all the promise of all the tools that are out there, and I really believe in all of this. But I think your average HR professional has a couple of things that they use on a regular basis, and they don't know what they don't know. So when I think about what's out there in terms of technology to really help us deliver on this promise of being empathetic, of communicating better, like what's out there? What do you see? What does this industry look like to you?
Yeah, first off, I think we have to own the reality that it's a massive industry, right? Analysts can't keep up with the HR tech marketplace, and that's all they do. There's so much new technology coming up, and disruption this, disruption that, cloud, buzzword. It's overwhelming for practitioners whose jobs, frankly, are overwhelming right now. Like right now, they're in this. They're juggling all of their kind of core responsibilities. They're dealing with, all of the emotional realities of the employee experiences and supporting them. They're dealing with pressure from, the executive team on how do you maintain productivity in these difficult times. And so that's a lot to carry. And then to kind of couple that with, what's the best tool that we can use to help us navigate this? It's really difficult. For me, I think tools that enhance and streamline communication are really important, and that's anything from video conferences. A lot of companies are on Slack or different messaging chats. Those are helpful. I'm actually intrigued, kind of longer term, especially as more companies remain distributed, for like nudge and prompt based tools specifically for managers, because I think managers can be pretty overwhelmed, and there's tools on the market right now that can give you nudges around, different life events of employees or activities or anniversaries or things like that that can just help them stay on top of making sure they're maintaining those connections with their employees, because they're also overwhelmed. I think the difficult thing for tech right now is that, everybody has been operating at a 10 out of 10 for months and months. And we don't know how long that's going to continue, but we know it's going to continue for a while. So like, how do you account for that? Again, empathize with that reality while adding tools that aren't like a +1 to that stress that they already have. It has to be easy. It has to be seamless. It has to ideally be integrated into some of the other platforms and tools they're already using. So it's not and now I have to go over here to do this thing.
I think one of the interesting things about the times we live in, Lars, and you brought this up last week, is that suddenly HR professionals are public health experts, they're architects, they've got a bunch of different roles on top of being in HR. And I would argue that they've been given the job of technologist without really like knowing where that came from. It's like, oh, suddenly I have to be an expert in cloud or whatever. And we like to say that, kindness is the killer app. And I think we're arguing in this discussion today that empathy is a really important skill for the 21st century. But if I work in human resources, like what do I need? What skills do I need going forward in order to really do a service, not only to the organization now, but going forward, and also to protect my sanity? I don't know. Minda, do you have an opinion on that?
Maybe a lot of opinions, but I do think that, I do, a class that I teach at NYU is talent development. And one of the pushbacks that a lot of students will always say is, everybody loves to hate HR. And I do believe that, that some people, they feel like that's where the frustration lies, like where that is. And I think right now we have a unique opportunity to empower HR just as much as we're empowering the talent, right? To be able to have that continuous feedback. And I think for so long, it's been very top down. And in some situations, HR has really worked with leadership, right? And to some degree, yes, talent on onboarding and things like that. But I think that there can be, as Lars said, those nudges to create an experience for them too, right? So I don't want to seem like I'm like, against HR practitioners, because I think they're very important in departments, but I do think that they are also the talent too, right? They are also the asset. And so we have to create systems to make sure that they're taken care of, because like you said, and I think that's part of the communication gap, right? So people have to be able to say what they need and feel like there won't be repercussion or backlash. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I know that everybody needs a little space and grace right now, and an opportunity to be able to say how they feel without, feeling like the world is tumbling down on them in quarantine.
That's really well said. Sharlyn, do you have an opinion on this? Like, when I think of like all the competencies that I've built up through all of the different HR associations, right? Like I can do a killer headcount spreadsheet, but nobody's going to ask me to do that in the 21st century anymore, So like, what should HR professionals be focused on in order to really just kill it going forward?
I think a big piece of it is remembering where you came from. We're being tasked with creating the employee experience. Remember what it was like to be an employee. Remember what it was like before you got into HR. I mean, I have to say, I got into HR under an unusual set of circumstances. Some people might know this story, but I was in a car accident and I spent a year in a full body cast. And the company that I worked for said to me, take your time, get well, when you're ready, come back to work. When I was ready to come back to work, I could not do the job that I had. The company said, we looked at your file, we think you're good at these things, come work in this department. When I got into that department, my boss said, we're going to send you to some classes, we're going to teach you the theory so you have a foundation to work from. All of you know there are companies out there that would never have done that in a zillion years. And in fact, there are companies out there that would have worked just as hard to figure out how to plan my exit strategy for me.
Yeah.
And so I've kept that with me as a human resources professional to remember what it's like to be an employee before I became a supervisor, before I became a manager. before I started sitting in department meetings. Remember what it's like to be an employee and that you're relying on your manager to remember your wants and needs for a schedule, that you're relying upon your manager to recognize all of the hard work that you do and remember all the times you've agreed to stay late or come in early or do all of those other things. It's important that we kind of not forget where we came from and use those experiences to create the ultimate employee experience.
God, I love that. You got me thinking about where I came from, which was a candy factory. That was my first HR job. So like we all come from these experiences where we have an idea of what HR could be. And actually, I was optimistic back then. I really loved the profession. And Sharlyn, had we worked together, I might still be in HR. I would love that. So Lars, as we start to wrap up this segment, I would really love to hear from you. Like, what do you think HR professionals need to be thinking about in the 21st century going forward? Like, we're living through COVID, we're living through social unrest, we're living through all this really important change globally. Where do we begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've hit on resiliency. I think that's essential. We've hit on empathy. I think that's essential. Learning agility is another thing that I would certainly add to that. I think that the times we're in are so dynamic. The technology is changing. We have new categories like HXM coming on. How do you take advantage of that? The world around us is changing, so we have to educate ourselves on, again, social injustice, pandemic response plans, all of these things that are happening externally, we have to be able to adapt to. But to me, I think one of the things, especially that's been reinforced during pandemic, that's really important is self-care. And I don't know how to define that yet, but I talked to a lot of chief people officers that are burnt out. They've been carrying this torch for 6 months. All of their employees are looking to them for leadership. The C-suite is looking to them for leadership. They're humans just like every one of those employees, and they're navigating their own world, their own kids, elder care, personal circumstances. And I just, I worry that if people aren't finding ways, especially at the executive level roles within HR, they're not finding ways to take care of themselves, to set some boundaries. We're gonna have a situation where we have lots of leaders that are just completely fried and barely able to function. So take your vacation, take your leave days, even if you can't go anywhere. Like unplug. Tell your CEO that like you're gonna be gone from Slack like fully for a couple of days, whatever you need. But I think it's vital that we have to remember that this analogy of put on your oxygen mask before you take care of those around you. As an industry, we're not doing that. And I think that we're at a real risk of burning out because if this, if the kickoff of this new decade has taught us anything, it's that stuff is real and it's busy and it's a lot and it's going to be a huge emotional toll, whether it's the election coming up, anything else. So find ways to prioritize your own self-care and set boundaries so that you can better serve your employees and create better workplaces for them.
That is so well said. And I just want to quickly say that about a year ago, I used this phrase self-care in front of my husband, and he didn't know what I was talking about. He like kind of had an amorphous idea of it, but like, how do you not know what self-care means? And I think we just haven't done enough time encouraging people to explore what it means for them, right? They think it might mean a spa day or something just, totally gendered. And it could just mean, Lars, to your point, turning off Slack, saying no, setting boundaries, and really putting yourself first. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and I would just say quickly, like also as a leader, employees are looking to you to set the standard, to set the expectation. So if you say, hey, we're an environment that really values work-life balance, and all you do is work, it doesn't line up. So you have to lead by example in these roles. And that means taking care of yourself.
Hey, trust me, I'm telling Ken what that means all the time now. Well, Minda, we're going to wrap up the show today. And I want to just start this segment by talking to you about this idea of practicing what you preach. I think for me, the number one competency in 2020 and beyond is self-leadership, right? And practicing what you preach can be very difficult if you work in HR and you work in the trenches. So lead us out with this discussion, like how do you do this? If you have ideas about HXM, if you have ideas about the employee experience, but you're not necessarily in that position of leadership, what's the message to those HR individuals?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that everybody is a leader in their company, in their organization. You don't have to have a title. Everybody's the chief people officer. Everybody's, it's up to everybody to make the workplace better than we found it. And so, if you're one of those people that want the workplace better than we found it, to create an experience where the workplace works for everybody, then now is a great time as we're moving into and creating new rules and tools and resources for you to chime in and say, hey, I know this is important to our company. I have some thoughts on this. And then in tandem, you're able to maybe get a leadership position, right? Volunteer yourself in ways you haven't before. So I feel like right now, because there are no real rules, we're flying the plane as we go. And so this is a great time for people, even if you don't have the title, to be able to say, here are some thoughts to make the workplace better, because it's important to have the data and the transactions and the processes, but we can't forget to have people at the center. And we have to have conversations.
Really well said. Thank you so much. Lars, what are your quick closing thoughts on all of this? How do we get people to stand up and practice what they preach?
I think it's just a matter of like being true to yourself and your values. I think it's easy, especially in an environment like this, to get caught up in emotions of a situation and feel like you need to say something that's going to, line up with that and not follow through. And I think this is a moment in time when you look at all the things that are happening, that everybody has to be more than just introspective on practicing what they preach, but actually following that and going down that road and educating themselves and learning and ultimately making changes necessary. I think it's easy, whether you look at Black Lives Matter and how some companies came out and cut a check or change their avatar and then have gone silent, right? Like that's not it. That's not living your values. That's not actually staying true to them. And so I think that it's really important that it's not just about the idea of something. It's the real work and discovery and effort and sustained effort that goes into that to actually make a change, make it real.
Accountability.
Thanks, yeah. What was that, Minda? Can you say it
I
again?
said accountability,
Yeah.
because that's where it all boils down to.
Really well said. Well, Sharlyn, take us out, our closing thought today on all of this, on standing up, on HXM, about practicing what you preach. What are your final thoughts?
I loved Minda and Lars's comments, and it almost like brought the two pieces together for me. If you take care of yourself, if you're true to you, who you are as an individual, then you can find those moments, as Minda mentioned, where you can influence what's happening in the organization. So really think about how you can bring those two pieces together, and stay true to your word and true to yourself, and look for moments where you can demonstrate value and make change in the organization.
Love it. Love it. Well, y'all, it's been a great conversation. And Sharlyn, it was great to have you as our guest today. Thank you so much. And Lars and Minda, always great to see you. We'll see you again next week. And everybody, you like these topics? I hope you do. We love talking about it. And we're going to be at Success Connect. And so that's a wonderful conference put on by SAP and SuccessFactors. You can find the information in the comments below. It's on October 6th. And we would love to see you there. So for everybody here, I'm Laurie Ruettimann, and thanks for watching The Rise of HXM. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.